Hi everyone, this is the second devlog for the game Spellfort. In this video I'll be talking about my trip to Midwest Gaming Classic, which is a gaming convention held annually in Milwaukee. It focuses primarily on retro gaming and pinball, but there's an area for indie developers to get booths and show off their games. So, in preparation for the convention, I made a few changes to my game. I wanted to observe multiple players playing the game in person, so I needed to implement local multiplayer functionality. This was a bit of a pivot since I had been focusing on Steam-based network multiplayer. Also, in order to facilitate a good in-person experience, I wanted to build an arcade cabinet to play my game on. This would hopefully be inviting to players and also fit with the theme of the convention. The first step in building the cabinet was to sort out what I was going to do about joysticks. I could build a control console from scratch, but that would take a little time. So I found a good off-the-shelf solution from AtGames called the QuadPlay control panel. This supported 4 simultaneous players, which I felt would be a good number to test the game with, and it had a USB connection that I could use with a Windows PC and the build of the game that I already had. One caveat of this solution was that there was 1 joystick per player, which didn't allow me to have that twin stick control that I had used for the Steam build. My solution for this limitation was to implement melee combat and circle back to ranged combat at a later date. The control panel integrated with Unity very nicely as it showed up as 4 distinct joysticks over USB, but there was a bit of a bug with this that I'll go over later. Next up, I wanted to build the cabinet itself, so I looked online at various plans. However, it seemed like they might not be easy to set up and tear down quickly, which was a requirement that I had so I could easily transport this cabinet to and from the convention. So I ended up doing what I usually do, which is get a rough idea of what I want to build in my head and then wander around the local home improvement store haphazardly. I bought a few half-inch panels of particle board and MDF and some various hardware, and then I sort of built the thing incrementally. After a few revisions with the circular saw and the Sawzall, I ended up with a 6-panel cabinet that was pretty easy to transport around. I did a dry fit test, put on some paint, and then called it done. I will say that between the particle board and the MDF was a lot smoother, so that's a little nicer for edges that players might come in contact with. With the whole system completed, I headed out to the Wisconsin Center in Milwaukee and set up the booth. I really enjoyed the diversity of games that were being developed by folks in the Future Classics area. There were several NES games being developed, a playable pop-up book, and there was a tabletop game near me as well. There was a fairly consistent stream of people coming through the Future Classics area throughout the weekend, so there wasn't much downtime, which is a good thing. People who played my game played for anywhere from a couple minutes up to almost an hour. And I got a lot of groups with 2, 3, and 4 players, which is what I was hoping for. The feedback I got on the game was incredibly useful, and I'm always impressed with how articulate and insightful playtesters can be. On the positive side, people complimented the art style, and I had some favorable comparisons to games like The Binding of Isaac and Castle Crashers, which is a high bar, but they both have that cute and spooky vibe that I'm going for. I also got some good feedback on the responsiveness of the control, and people seem to enjoy the upgrade system as well. In terms of areas for improvement, I got a lot of good actionable advice. The biggest category within this feedback was to add more indicators of what was happening in the game. So, for instance, if your abilities recharge, like dashing, attacking, or various upgrades, players want a really clear way to see that an action is available. They also wanted a clear indicator of where threats were. So, for instance, if an enemy has a ranged attack, what direction are they going to be firing in? or if there's an AoE that will affect your character, they'd like to see what the radius of that effect is. Also, having a noticeable indicator of when your character is close to death was a common suggestion. Mechanically, there were some suggestions about making things more or less difficult. As this is a wave-based game, the difficulty curve ramped up pretty quickly in terms of number of enemies per wave. But as the waves progress, the total number of concurrent enemies doesn't grow, so while a wave might be much longer, you don't have as many corresponding periods of frantic action as you might expect. There were some other miscellaneous bits of feedback, such as adjusting the speed of certain enemies, adjusting the camera and the hitboxes, and finally I had some crates in the level that were not breakable, but players said that perhaps they should be, and contain items to collect. There were a few noticeable bugs in the game that were uncovered throughout the weekend. The first of which was that the player's position on the arcade console didn't line up with the heads-up display on the screen, which was a side effect of some of the input code. There were also a couple of animation glitches on the characters. And finally, there was a peculiar bug that I called the infinite tombstone bug, which occurred occasionally when a player would die. So normally in the game, when a player dies, a tombstone appears and a countdown starts for them to respawn, and this will occur if at least one other player is alive. However, in some cases, players found that the respawn timer simply stopped and they stayed a tombstone. They could move and attack in this state, and enemies would aggro toward them, but it didn't initially seem like a respawn would be possible. That said, a lot of the players who tested the game were fairly persistent and found a way around this bug. They determined that if you took damage from an AoE or an enemy projectile, then you could get out of this state. In summary, I had a great time at the convention, and I enjoyed meeting all of the attendees and other exhibitors. And having an event like this is a great motivator to work on your game and get it in front of people. So I'm looking forward to more conventions in the future. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.